So in this year, the year that Cecily Saunders would have been 100, in this year, the 51st year of the modern hospice movement, and so many of us have been celebrating big birthdays for our hospices. Put your hands up if you've had a 30 or a 35th year or a 25th year. Lots and lots of you. So it's time just to pause and reflect on where we are and what we've achieved. In the last year, hospices again helped an incredible 208,000 people across the UK. You've helped 83% of those in communities, in their own homes, in care homes, working together with partners. And the massive success story of bereavement support has helped 49,000 families. It's absolutely incredible. The holistic study which we've been working on, which we'll report back in the new year, has shown the amazing partnerships. It's not just about hospices anymore. We're working across hospitals, across GPs, community pharmacies, to make palliative and hospice care available to so many more people. We've been broadening out from cancer. We've been helping people with COPD, with neurological conditions and heart failure. And we've done a huge amount of work in the last year with the homeless community, gypsies and travellers, and other communities who felt less well served by hospice services. We've been breaking down barriers left, right and centre. There's an incredible 40,000 staff in hospices, 125,000 volunteers, and everybody who's involved across the sector, in hospitals, the GPs, the OTs, the community pharmacists, the community nurses, the district nurses. All of you, you are absolutely incredible. You are an inspiration. Once again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for everything that you do. So where now? Where are we going now? And I've been having so many conversations with you all again this year, going up and down the country, and many of you will recognise elements of what I'm about to say. Because the hospice movement, in its 51st year, is an institution. And for any institution, we have three options. We have preservation, evolution, and revolution. Now, I'll tell you a bit of a secret. I came up with evolution and revolution all on my own. But a couple of weeks ago, I was watching Grand Designs, and the fantastic Kevin MacLeod gave me the third one, preservation. Isn't he smart? So I've stolen that one a little bit, and he gave me my speech for today, which really helps. So starting with preservation. It's safe, isn't it? It's responsible. It feels like the right thing to do sometimes. If we preserve our hospices, we're preserving them for the next generation, and we can carry on doing exactly what we've done. We can keep our inpatient units full, we can keep our community teams busy, we can keep on doing what we're doing. And we often think of do nothing, doing the same things as the no change option. But there is no change option anymore. The world is changing around us. We know that death and dying is completely different from how it was 10 years ago. People are dying over a longer period of time. They've got multiple conditions. Since 2014, the death rate has gone up by 32,000 already in this country because of the baby boomers. And we know from when Irene Higginson was standing in this spot in Liverpool a year ago, that by 2040, the need for palliative care will have increased by 25%. There is no change option. Do nothing means atrophy. It means irrelevance. We can't afford to do that. Now, I know I'm speaking to the converted in this room because that's why you're all here. You're all sharing information. You're all learning. You're all constantly changing. And that's where I come to evolution, because that's where the hospice movement is. Now, often I'll have people from outside the movement and they'll come and see me and they'll say, you know what, hospices haven't really changed, have they? They're still the same. And I look at them as though they've gone mad, because I go around the country all the time and I can say with conviction that hospice services look nothing today like they looked 5 years ago. Sure, the inpatient units are still there, and you'll walk in and you'll still see the friendly faces, and we still feel that sense of calm and security and safety within hospices. But everywhere you look, whether we're looking at daycare, whether we're looking at hospice at home, whether we're looking at the skills we have in the inpatient unit, the way we use our staff, the way we interact with our patients, the way we get to them so much earlier, everything has changed dramatically over the past 5 years. Hospices are constantly learning, they're constantly evolving their services, and yet the dial hasn't moved. So you will remember, I stood up in front of you 3 years ago and I said we're going to start collecting stats for the hospice movement. Well, in 2016, we helped 206,000 people. In 2017, we helped 212, and this year it's been 208,000 people. We know that our funding is going up slightly every year, and it's at 1.43 billion, which is fantastic. And over £1 billion of that, once again, is raised by the public. But we're static. Last year, we know there was 118,000 people who could have benefited from hospice care who couldn't reach us for whatever reason. And last year, 150,000 people in this country died of frailty in our hospitals. We're not moving the dial. We're running to stand still. What's going on? Now, you'll be able to go and have a look at the Hospice Finance Report, and that's going to give us some clues. Because although hospice funding was up last year by 38 million, and 12 million of that came from a rise in NHS funding, I know, speaking to hospices, that for 7 years, 2/3 of us have said that our funding has either been frozen or cut. So how does that make sense? Well, we know that the dial isn't moving on the 30% average for adult hospices and 15% for children's hospices. We're hearing about so many new services, rapid response 24/7. Can you help us pay for a palliative care consultant? So the funding is shifting and moving. We have to find the rest of the 70%, of course, to fund that. And then the services that we're already funding that everybody needed, we still have to find the funding. So it's getting more and more difficult. Now, whilst our fundraising is holding up, and that's great, we've seen a drop this year of 9% in legacies. I don't know whether it's a trend yet. It's still difficult on the high street, but our profits from our hospice shops are holding up at around 24%. But the big thing here is that our costs are rising. Last year, hospice costs rose by 4.4% and 5% in terms of our staff costs. Now, when we think our 40,000 staff represent 68% of hospice costs, and staff costs rose by 5% last year, and that was before the NHS pay rises that the government have told us that they can't help us support those for hospices. We know that we're running to standstill. We know that every year is getting more and more difficult. So realistically, evolution is going to mean doing more, doing different things, and trying to stay within that financial envelope. What can we do? How can we merge? How can we collaborate? How can we share knowledge? How can we try new things? And it's going to take so much energy. But what then of all the people that we are not reaching? How do we get to them? And hospices often, people from hospices come and ask me, what's the blueprint? What's the blueprint of the future for the hospice movement? And actually, I think that's the easy bit. We almost know that. So last year, we went around the country and we did our Hospice UK roadshows, and we used our PopNat tool. And I hope everybody's been and had a look at our PopNat tool. If you haven't, it's on our website. And we used anonymised data from a city in the UK. And everybody sat round and said, if this city never had any palliative care, what would you design today? Nobody designed a hospice in the way that we would recognise it. It was all the ethos of the hospice, of course, but it was about community services. It was about using existing buildings. It was about understanding where our demographics are, where are areas of disadvantage, how can we get to them? How can we use community centres and churches and other charities to get to people with daycare? How can we use hubs on the high street to get to people with hospice services? How can we use care homes? How can we use hospitals and use beds in a different way? That bit's the easy bit, but it's getting from where we are now to getting to where we need to be today and then predicting the future, which is a bit more difficult. But we know what's going to happen in 5 years' time. We can predict the future in terms of our demographics. We know the 2012 Health and Social Care Act is unlikely to be scrapped in the next 5 years. And we know that we have the long-term NHS plan and the funding commitment. So we kind of know where we're going to be in 5 years. But there's a legitimacy to what we do today. If we only get a certain amount of funding, how can we justify doing radical things, potentially rerouting, closing down our inpatient units that the public have worked so hard to fund, moving to community services, changing what we do, helping new cohorts of people? What about the people that we're helping today? There's a legitimacy to what we do. There's a legitimacy to our inpatient units, to our specialty care, to our learning, to our teaching, to working with the people that we're working with today. We can't abandon them. And that's why I think that we're not seeing the radical change in the sector that so many of us would like to see. So what I propose is around revolution. And revolution will work in partnership with evolution. It's got to work at the same time. It's got to work in parallel, but we've got to decouple them. So what does that mean? Well, I'm going to ask you, some of you who have the time and the energy to work even harder, because whilst we're doing what we do today and constantly changing it and constantly evolving it, some of us need to be looking at new pastures, new joint ventures, new ways of funding services, ways of working with care homes and other providers, looking at the frailty community, looking at the dementia, people with dementia, looking at those families. How do we help them? Some of those will fail. They'll have to fail. That's how we learn. Some of them will be able to pull back into the hospice community. There'll be new ways of bringing funding in, new commercial opportunities. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be interesting. I want you all to look out for evolution and revolution. Think about what you're doing, what falls into both camps. We'll be developing these themes throughout the conference, throughout our roadshows next year, throughout our trustee conference, and then the conference next year. We'll be pulling in speakers and thought leaders from other sectors. We'll be looking at what we need to do. Because I think if we don't look at the next wave and we don't put our expertise into that, we will be letting people down. And we know that we have so much to give. It's going to be incredibly hard. We're all going to have to work even harder than ever. But I know that we can do that. I am incredibly proud of the sector that I represent. I couldn't be more proud of the people here today. I'm excited by the future, and I know that together we can all help shape it. Thank you very much.